Rain pinned itself in thin diagonal lines against the glass of St. Gabriel Medical Center. The sky over Seattle was the color of a used bandage gray, and tired light coming in more from the ceiling panels than from the day outside. Avery Cross pushed a cart piled with used linens down the main hallway. The wheels squeaked every few steps. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, reflected in the stainless steel crash carts, the polished floor, the brushed metal elevator doors. Each bright surface threw a shard of white back at her. She kept her eyes on her hands, fingers curled neatly around the cart handle, knuckles pale, nails trimmed short and clean. The skin across her palms had faint ridges of old callus in places that did not belong to nurse work. She closed her grip just a little tighter. As she passed a heavy steel door, a red sign caught the corner of her eye. Rooftop helipad authorized personnel only. She did not mean to slow down, but her steps faltered for half a second. Her gaze slid up toward the ceiling as if she could see through concrete and wiring to the gray sky above. For a heartbeat, there was the echo of another sound in her head, a low chopping thrum that did not belong to the quiet hallway. Her breath hitched. She blinked once, then pushed the cart forward again. Rubber wheels squeaked. The hum of the lights folded back over her like a blanket. Ahead, the nurse's station glowed in a pool of warmer light screens and coffee cups and clipboards scattered across the counter. A cluster of voices spilled out into the corridor, easy and sharp at the same time. "She here again already," a woman's voice said, pitched just loud enough to travel. "First week and she moves like a shadow. Kinda creepy." Avery drew closer. She could see them now. Nurse Kelly Monroe leaned against the desk. Blonde hair pulled into a high, too-tight ponytail pen, tapping against a chart. She thrived in the center of attention, shoulders squared, badge angled perfectly toward anyone who might read it. Next to her stood Dr. Jared Lynn, a second-year resident with tired eyes and a permanent half-smirk. "I swear," Kelly continued, flipping a page with a snap, "I tried to ask her where she trained and she looked at me like I was serving a subpoena." Jared snorted. "Maybe she did her hours in a library. She looks like she'd faint if a patient raises their voice." Laughter floated out, edged with something harder than humor. Avery stopped the cart a few steps away and began to rearrange the clean linens on the top shelf. Her shoulders rounded almost imperceptibly. She focused on smoothing a folded sheet that did not really need smoothing. Kelly finally noticed her. "Morning cross, Vico." "Oh, Mom, she called. The tone hovered between friendly and testing. "You planning on saying more than 3 words today, or is that your daily limit?" Avery kept her eyes on the linens. "Good morning, Nurse Monroe," she said. Her voice was soft, even unhurried. "I finished stocking rooms 12 through 18. Kelly tilted her head. "Wow, a full sentence. Progress." Jared looked her over, gaze sliding from her slight frame to her plain scrubs to the unadorned shoes. "So where did you work before this, Avery?" he asked. "Urgent care, small-town clinic." Avery took a slow breath. The smell of disinfectant and stale coffee pressed in around her. She could feel all their eyes on her waiting. "Out of state," she said, "mostly in high-pressure settings." "High pressure," Jared raised an eyebrow. "Like what, Black Friday at a walk-in clinic?" Kelly chuckled. "Relax, Cross, we don't bite. But St. Gabriel is not a training ground. If something drops, we need to know you won't freeze." Avery nodded once. "Understood," she said. She picked up the cart handle again and moved on. It was easier to move than to stay still inside that circle of casual judgment. Room after room, she stocked gauze ivory tubing, saline bags, gloves. Her hands moved in a quite efficient pattern. Reach, place, straighten. The simple rhythm settled into her muscles. It was almost pleasant, the predictability of it. In room 810, an elderly woman dozed with a crime show murmuring on low volume. In 8012, a teenage boy played a game on his phone, neon lights flashing across his sleepy face. In 814, a housekeeping cart sat outside the closed-door mop bucket still half full, a faint tang of bleach in the air. Avery glanced at her watch. Just after 9, first day of day shift. Her first week at St. Gabriel, and she already knew where the coffee machine rattled, which elevator stuck for a second before the doors opened, which attending liked their charts printed instead of digital. At the end of the hallway, Kelly stood with another nurse reviewing a medication list. Avery rolled her cart over. "I restocked the supply closets," she said, "and the medroom cabinets. I checked the expiration dates." Kelly did not look up at first. "You initialed the inventory sheet like I said." "Yes." "And you scanned the saline bags this time." "Yes." Kelly finally turned eyes sharp. "Because yesterday you skipped 2 lines. That is how errors start. I cannot have that." Avery's jaw tightened a fraction. "I went back and corrected it last night." Kelly held her gaze, searching for some sign of attitude or challenge. She found none. That seemed to irritate her more than open defiance would have. Do it right the first time cross, we say. My Narquois, she said. We do not have time to babysit. Yes, Nurse Monroe. A monitor beeped rhythmically in one of the nearby rooms. The sound picked up speed as someone adjusted a drip. Somewhere down the corridor, a food tray clattered. Avery moved away. She could feel the words clinging to the back of her neck like a damp collar. Quiet, creepy, freeze. At the far end of the floor, a narrow window looked out over the city. Between the smudges of fingerprints and the reflection of her own face, Avery could see a slice of sky and the faint outline of rooftop equipment vents and ducts and the square marking of the helipad higher still. She watched a moment too long. In her mind, the gray sky shifted darker. Rain turned to ash. The low hum of the hospital deepened into the heavy chop of rotor blades pounding in her chest and her teeth. A cart rattled behind her, and she blinked, shaking herself free. The window showed only Seattle again, wet, ordinary. She pushed the cart back toward the central station. The overhead speakers crackled to life. Code Blue Room 814, Code Blue Room 814. The words landed in the hallway like a dropped instrument. Kelly straightened. Jared's smirk vanished. A nurse dropped a stack of charts onto the counter. The air snapped tight. Move, Kelly barked. Crash cart to 8 won't be now. Chair scraped. Footsteps thundered. The crash cart tore free from its wall socket and swung around wheels squealing as someone steered it down the hall. Avery's heart thudded once hard. The familiar surge of adrenaline rose burning down her arms into her hands. For a split second, she saw a different hallway, concrete blown out, sparking wires in the ceiling, men on the ground, radios screaming. She closed her eyes, just for the length of one breath. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. The numbers passed through her silently. The hospital came back into focus. She released the cart and walked, then quickened to a jog following the others. The floor shook under so many feet. Nurses pressed against the walls to make space. The crash cart squealed to a stop outside room 814. The housekeeping cart was still there, mop angled out like a forgotten flag. The smell of bleach and something metallic threaded the air. Avery stepped past it. Her hand reached for the door handle, fingers steady, palm dry. She curled her fingers around the cool metal. Then she pushed the door open. The room hit her with light and noise all at once. Monitor alarms shrieked over the hiss of oxygen and the scrape of wheels. A tray of instruments lay crooked on a chair, a blood pressure cuff half unrolled on the floor. In the center of it all, an old man in a faded hospital gown lay still on the bed, skin the color of wet paper. The cardiac monitor at his side showed a thin green line, flat and unforgiving. Henry Dawson, 72, someone yelled. Post-op minor vascular procedure he just dropped. Nurse Kelly was at the head of the bed, fumbling with an oxygen mask. A younger nurse patted the man's cheek, voice too high, too quick. Dr. Jared Lynn dug through the top drawer of the crash cart medication boxes, rattling as his hands shook. Where is the epi? He snapped. Why is this drawer a mess? It is not a mess, the young nurse protested. I stocked it this morning. Kelly slapped the oxygen mask over Henry's face. It fogged with each weak attempt at breath, then stopped fogging at all. Move, move, Kelly barked. We are losing the airway. Avery stepped inside and let the door fall half shut behind her. The noise muffled for a fraction of a second, hospital sounds pressed close like hands against the glass. Her eyes ran the scene without lingering. Patient, monitor, IV lines, people's positions, the clock on the wall. She felt nothing at first. Or rather, she felt everything and named none of it. The fear in the room, the heavy scent of antiseptic and sweat, the way the air itself seemed not to move. Cross, get the compressions going, Jared said, not looking up, still hunting for vials. There was a note in his voice that said he did not really expect her to be useful, that he was saying it because someone had to do it. Avery stepped to the side of the bed. Gloved hands were still on the patient's chest, pressing too soft, too fast. She placed her palm gently over the nurse's wrist. I have it, she said. The nurse moved away, relief and shame mixed in her eyes. Avery laced her fingers together and put the heel of her hand in the center of Henry Dawson's sternum. The bone felt fragile under her palms. His ribs rose under the skin like the slats of an old fence. Charging to 200, Jared called, voice unsteady. Somebody keep compressions going until I say clear. Avery started to press. The first push met resistance, then gave. The second found the rhythm. She drove straight down hard, letting the springs of the mattress take some of the recoil, counting in her head, steady as a pendulum. 1, 2, 3, 4. The world narrowed to the feel of bone under her hands and the distant wail of the alarm. Her arms locked shoulders over her wrists, each movement clean. The sound of the room blurred into a single hum behind the thud of her own breath. In hallway echo, another lifetime away, she had done this in the back of a transport truck with bullets pinging off the armor and dust clogging her throat. Here, the floor did not sway. The walls were intact. The danger was quieter, but it was still the same shape. Cross, you're going to crack him in half, Kelly snapped. He's already gone, Avery said without looking up. We are trying to pull him back. Her voice was not loud, yet it cut through the panic. There was no apology in it, only fact. Got it, Jared said suddenly. A box rattled free in his hand. Epinephrine 1 milligram. He dropped it onto the cart, pad tore it open, drew it into a syringe. On my count, he said, pulse check. Avery stopped pressing just long enough for Kelly to feel at Henry's neck. Kelly shook her head once sharp. No pulse. Shockable rhythm, Jared said, glancing at the monitor, though the line still hung flat. Charging to 200. Avery's eyes flicked up. Charge after IPA, she said. We need circulation first. Jared looked at her surprised. For a moment, irritation flared in his eyes. This was his code, his responsibility, not some quiet nurse's. Do you want to run this? He asked. I want him to live, she replied. Her tone did not rise. It did not need to. Jared hesitated, then jabbed the syringe into the IV port. Epi and he said, Epi. Indi camion, she said. Resume compressions. Avery answered herself, already pressing again. The monitor kept screaming its flat alarm. The room tasted of plastic and adrenaline. The fluorescent light above the bed flickered once, then steadied. Sweat gathered at the back of Avery's neck under the collar of her scrubs. Her arms burned, but the burn felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. She did not speed up, did not slow down. 1, 2, 3, 4. She watched the second hand on the wall clock sweep. 20 seconds. 30. 40. Okay, Jared said, voice firmer. Charging now, 200. The defibrillator whined up in pitch, a rising note that sat on top of the monitors and the alarms. The smell of heated plastic joined the rest. Clear, he ordered. Avery lifted her hands a fraction of an inch, just enough. Pads pressed to chest, there was a crisp slap, then a jolt. Henry's body jerking under the shock. The monitor line jittered, paused, then drew a wavering series of peaks. Not pretty, not perfect, but not flat. A rhythm, the younger nurse breathed. He has a rhythm. Check for pulse, Avery said. Kelly's fingers pressed into the hollow of Henry's neck, her face suddenly very still. I have something, she said. Weak, but I have it. The alarm changed tone from a long, continuous scream to a steady, irregular beeping. It sounded almost like someone catching their breath after running messy but alive. The room exhaled as one. Shoulders dropped. Someone laughed once too loudly, then cut it off. Bag him gently, Jared said. Get respiratory up here. Order an urgent echo. We need labs, troponin full panel. He turned to Avery, eyes narrowing as if seeing her for the first time. How did you know that timing? He asked. The EP, the compressions, the pause. That was not guesswork. Avery stepped back from the bed. Her hands hovered in the air for a moment, empty, then moved to strip off her gloves. The latex snapped softly as it came away from her wrists. I have worked codes before, she said. Where? Jared asked. What kind of facility? Places where there is no margin, she answered. It was not really an answer. It was all she was willing to give. Kelly wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of moisture above her eyebrow. Her eyes were still on Henry, but her words were aimed at Avery. You acted outside of protocol, Cross, she said. You took over compressions without waiting. You questioned the lead physician in the middle of a code. That is not how we do things. I was assigned compressions, Avery replied quietly. He needed effective compressions. And you decided what effective is. Kelly's voice sharpened, cutting through the delicate relief in the room. You have been here, 5 days? You do not run my floor. A flush crept up the younger nurse's neck. The tech at the back of the room stared at the floor. No one wanted conflict now, not with the patient still lying there. Avery's shoulders lowered a fraction. Whatever small spark had been in her eyes a moment before dimmed. I apologize, she said, if I overstepped. Her gaze slid toward Henry. His chest rose gently under the bag valve, his eyelids fluttering with some small, unconscious reflex. I will review the protocol, she added. Kelly opened her mouth ready for another rebuke, then seemed to sense the eyes on her. The doctor, the younger nurse, even the respiratory therapist who had just slipped in were all listening. She cleared her throat instead. Make sure you do, she said, but the bite had dulled a little. The team settled into postcode tasks. Orders went into the computer. Vitals were recorded. The crash cart was restocked from the drawers in the wall. The adrenaline high thinned into a careful efficiency. Avery stayed long enough to help move Henry to a better position on the bed, to check that the sheets under him were dry and smooth, to tuck the corners so he would not lie on creases. Her hands freed from compressions moved with the same quiet precision as before. Cross, Jared called as she turned to leave. She paused at the threshold. You ever done ICU work? He asked. Real ICU? Real ICU, not step down. She hesitated. The memory of metal floors and hanging IV bags in a moving aircraft flashed bright and sharp. Something like it, she said. Jared studied her face. There were fine lines around her eyes that did not match her age, the kind carved by too many sleepless nights and too much fluorescent light. "You are not what I thought you were," he said softly, almost to himself. Avery did not ask what he had thought. She stepped out into the hallway. The door fell shut behind her with a soft click. The overhead speaker went quiet again. For a moment, the only sound was the regular beep from inside room 814, muffled by the wall. Her arms ached now that the work was done. She flexed her fingers one at a time. The faint sting in the heel of her palm told her she had pressed hard enough. At the nurse's station, the bustle resumed. Kelly was already on the phone with cardiology, her tone clipped and brisk, the near disaster folded into her day like another entry on her checklist. Avery moved toward the supply room. The white shelves and labeled bins greeted her with their calm order. Gauze in one row, tape in another, syringes lined up like soldiers on review. She reached for a box of gloves. As she lifted it, something small and metallic shifted in her scrub pocket and clicked against her hip. For a second, she thought it was a pen. Her fingers slipped into the pocket and brushed against cool metal, instead the familiar outline of a badge no one at St. Gabriel had seen. Her hand closed around it through the fabric, holding it in place. She stayed like that, frozen in the quiet of the supply room, while the echo of her own heartbeat thumped in her ears. Behind the wall, a cart rolled by, wheels rumbling over the threshold. Laughter flared and faded. The hospital breathed around her. She released the badge and let it settle back into the depths of her pocket. By the time she stepped out of the supply room, her face had returned to its careful neutrality. The day went on in fragments. A medication question in N. A family asking for extra blankets in 8 to 12. A lab tech complaining about the pneumatic tube system. Ordinary requests, ordinary answers. Yet the edges of things felt sharper. Twice she caught someone at the station looking at her and glancing away when she turned her head. The young nurse from the code handed her a stack of wound care supplies with a quick, earnest, "Thank you for earlier." Avery nodded and did not know what to do with the warmth that flickered in her chest at the words. Near 11, as she walked past the same window that looked out over the city, she paused automatically. Seattle stretched gray and damp below the Sound, cloaked in low mist. On a farther rooftop, a construction crane stood idle, its arm reaching toward the clouds. For a moment, the glass under her palm vibrated, barely enough to see, just enough to feel. She frowned and lifted her hand. The vibration came again, stronger this time, a faint tremor running through the wall and into her bones. A coffee cup at the nurse's station rattled in its saucer. An alarm did not cause that. A gurney did not cause that. Somewhere overhead, a low, heavy thumping began to build, slow and regular, like a giant heart starting to beat. "Did you feel that?" the young nurse asked, eyes wide. The overhead speaker crackled, the voice of the security officer raised over a background roar. "Attention all units," he called. "We have a military helicopter inbound. They are securing the roof." Footsteps pounded toward the stairwell. People peeled away from their workstations, pulled by curiosity and something older than that. Avery stayed very still. The sound above deepened, the chop of rotors pressing promises into the ceiling. The sign over the rooftop door at the end of the hall glowed red in her memory. The floor shivered once more under her feet. The floor tremor rose into a steady vibration. Light fixtures trembled in their housings. Somewhere above, something heavy cut circles in the air. The sound grew thicker, that deep, repetitive thump that did not belong to any machine inside the building. It came from the sky, from memory, from nights Avery had tried to bury under clean sheets and quiet hallways. Nurses stepped out from behind curtains. A transporter pushing an empty wheelchair stopped mid-stride. Conversations broke off, words hanging unfinished in the air. The stairwell door at the end of the hall burst open. A security officer in a too-tight uniform stumbled through, cheeks flushed, radio crackling at his shoulder. "There is a Navy helicopter taking the roof," he shouted over the persistent thudding. "They are requesting medical support, critical incoming." Kelly's eyes flashed. "Why here?" she demanded. "We are a civilian center." "Closest facility with a helipad," the officer said, already backing toward the stairs again. "They are landing now." He disappeared back through the door. The rotors roared louder, as if in agreement. People moved, pulled by noise and curiosity. Residents, nurses, a respiratory therapist, a couple of techs, all drawn toward the stairwell and the promise of something different from the usual drip adjustments and medication passes. Avery did not move at first. The world narrowed to the drum inside her chest and the matching drum above. The air felt thinner. The young nurse from the code brushed past her. "Come on," she said, half breathless. "You have to see this." Avery's feet refused. Then training pushed through frozen instinct. If a helicopter landed on a hospital roof in the rain with urgency in its approach, someone was hurt badly. Curiosity had nothing to do with it. Curiosity had. She turned and followed, body moving before mind caught up. The stairwell was a concrete chute packed with bodies. People pressed against the rails to let emergency staff climb faster. Someone laughed too loudly, nerves bleeding out. Someone else muttered about paperwork and clearances. By the time Avery reached the door to the roof access level, the thump of the rotors had become a full-body experience. It pressed against her eardrums and teeth vibrated in the soles of her shoes. A blast of cold, wet air punched through the gap as the door opened. Rain rode in sideways. The smell of exhaust and wet concrete rushed down the stairwell. "Stay clear of the edge lines," security barked from somewhere ahead. "Do not cross the painted circle unless directed." They spilled out onto the roof. The sky was a low lid of cloud. A dark Navy helicopter hovered just above the landing circle, its rotor wash turning the falling rain into a white storm. The machine looked heavy and purposeful, its belly open to reveal a tight interior crowded with shapes. The pilot eased it down. The skids kissed the painted circle. The roar changed pitch, still loud, less teeth rattling. A crewman in a helmet hopped out, crouching low under the spinning blades. His flight suit snapped in the wind. He held up one gloved hand palm out to keep the gawking crowd from pressing closer. Behind Avery, Kelly tugged her scrub top tighter at the neck, squinting into the spray. "This is ridiculous," Kelly muttered, but there was a note of raw awe in her voice. Another figure climbed out, taller, bulkier, shoulders wide, under a dark flight jacket. He peeled off his helmet as he ran toward the cluster of hospital staff. Short black hair clung wet to his scalp. His face was set in a fixed expression of focus that did not waste itself on pleasantries. "Who is in charge medically up here, here?" He shouted. His voice had to fight the wind and blades. Kelly straightened. "I am the charge nurse for this floor," she called back. He looked right past her. "We are looking for Specialist Avery Cross," he yelled. "United States Navy SEAL Team, combat medic. We were told she's on staff here." The words landed heavier than the rain. The group fell quiet. Heads turned as one, some slowly, some in a quick jerk, following some invisible thread through the crowd. Avery felt every gaze slide along her skin. Her stomach dropped, then clenched. She had changed cities, cut her hair, traded one uniform for another. She had left that title on a desk 3 years ago. Yet here it was spoken aloud on a rooftop in Seattle. Kelly's mouth opened, then closed again. Her eyes moved from the Navy officer to Avery and back, trying to assemble the pieces into something that made sense. "You have the wrong person," Kelly started. "She's a new hire. That has to be a mistake." The officer's eyes found Avery's badge, the plastic rectangle catching a slice of gray light. "Cross Avery," it read in black letters. He stepped closer, rain running down his cheeks. Up close, Avery could read the name tape above his pocket. "Rios. Specialist Cross," he said lower now, but no less urgent. "Doc, thank God. It is Pierce. We are minutes from losing him. We need you aboard now." The name struck harder than the rotors. Pierce. Sound dropped away. For a brief, disorienting second, there was no rain, no roof, no hospital. There was only a different darkness and a voice over a radio that never came. She felt her hand move on its own fingers, finding the weight in her pocket, closing hard around the small disc of metal there. The edges bit into her palm. Pain cleared the fog. "I'm not practicing with the Navy anymore," she said. Her voice sounded far away to her own ears. "You are practicing here," Rios fired back. "You are still a medic. That man in there only trusts 2 things, gravity and your hands. He is holding for you, but not for long." Wind snatched at the hem of Avery's scrub top. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from exertion, but from a very old fear that tasted almost like guilt. Kelly stepped in eyes sharp between Avery and Rios. "This is a civilian hospital," she said. "She's not cleared for whatever battlefield procedure you are about to request." Rios turned his head just enough to look at her. In that moment, the easy respect he had used with the crowd vanished. Something colder moved in behind his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, each word precise, "I do not have time to explain that your nurse is the reason half of Bravo team ever came home 3 years ago. You can be in my way, or you can be out of it." The rain drummed on the roof. The rotors beat the air. No one spoke. Avery's fingers uncurled from around the badge in her pocket. Her other hand went to the cuff of her glove, snapping the thin blue latex free. It peeled off in a wet slither. She stripped the other one too, letting them both fall into a nearby trash bag, held open by a wide-eyed orderly. The quiet nurse expression slipped from her face like a mask set aside. What remained was not harder exactly. It was simply less concerned with how it appeared. "Show me," she said to Rios. They ran. The wind hit harder, closer to the helicopter, full of fuel and metal and rain. Avery ducked automatically as they crossed into the circle of spinning blades, though there was more than enough clearance. Habit, like an old scar, did not care about exact measurements. Her shoes slipped once on the wet paint. Rios caught her elbow and steadied her. The touch was brief. Inside the open side door, the world tightened. Noise compressed into a pulsing roar that filled the small space. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with copper and antiseptic and the stale tang of old sweat trapped in canvas straps. A man lay on a stretcher secured to the floor. A cervical collar hugged his neck. Straps crossed his chest and hips. White gauze glowed through the slits of his torn shirt stained dark in the center. An oxygen mask fogged erratically against his face. The skin around it had taken on a dusky tint. A Navy corpsman sat braced at his head trying to manage the airway and bags at the same time. His eyes were too wide. His hand on the bag valve trembled. "Avery Cross," Rios shouted into the fuselage. "Doc is here." The man on the litter turned his head slightly as far as the collar allowed. His eyelids fluttered. For a second, Avery saw him not as he was now, but as he had been on a different ridge. Laughing in the blue light of dawn, helmet crooked on his head, joking that they would all go out on some ridiculous mission that involved goats and an old pickup truck, not something worthy of a plaque. Now his hair was longer, his face thinner, but the line of his jaw was the same. "Logan?" she said before she could stop herself. His gaze pulled into focus, cloudy but deliberate. "Craw," he rasped through the oxygen mask. Each syllable sounded like it cost him something. Knew they would drag you out of hiding. Emotion spiked in her throat, hot and sharp. No time for that. She moved to his side, hands hovering just above his chest. The helicopter's deck vibrated under her feet. Her knees adjusted without thought, bending to absorb it. "Report," she said, eyes on his face, her voice shifting into the cadence she'd used too many times before. "What happened? What have you given? What are his vitals doing?" The corpsman responded, words tumbling out. "GSW to the chest, likely through and through. We decompressed left side, en route needle, but his sats keep dropping. BP bottoming 70 over palp heart rate 140 and climbing. Breath sounds diminished, right almost gone. We are losing him." Avery pulled the oxygen mask aside for a second, watching Logan's lips. Cyanosis crept in at the edges. His breaths were shallow and fast with a grunt at the end. She placed one hand flat on his right chest, fingers splayed, feeling for expansion. Her other hand traced the line of his trachea, checking for deviation. The hollow above his sternum tugged in with each breath. Neck veins stood out even in the dim light. "Tension pneumothorax on the right," she said. "Collapse likely hemothorax building behind it. He does not have time for stairs or an operating room." "You can stabilize him here," Rios said. It was not a question. A shadow fell across the open doorway. Kelly appeared there, hair whipped sideways, mouth set. "You cannot perform surgery in a helicopter," she shouted, hands gripping the frame. "That is malpractice. We have facilities downstairs. We can page a thoracic surgeon." Avery did not look up. She saw the field instead. Jungle edge, broken hillside. Men calling for a medic while someone in an air-conditioned office weighed options. She took one short breath. 4 and 7 held 8 out as much as the roaring air allowed. "There is no time," she said. "Every second we spend arguing is a liter more blood in the wrong place." She met Logan's gaze again. He was fading, his pupils glassing over, but there was a shred of awareness there. "I'm not cutting you open on a rooftop," she told him, the corner of her mouth quirking a ghost of old banter. "You do not get to make my job harder that way." His eyes crinkled slightly. The sound he made might have been a laugh if it had not been soaked in pain. "I trust your hands," he murmured. That settled it. Avery lifted her chin toward the corpsman. "I need 2 large bore IVs, 18 gauge or bigger now," she ordered. "Wide open fluids. Get me a proper decompression kit and a chest tube. If you do not have a tube, I will make one." The corpsman jolted into action, grateful for orders. Rios dipped past Kelly at the door, leaning close to her words. "Unless you plan to hold a retractor, Nurse Monroe," he said in a low warning. "Step back and let the medic work." Kelly's face drained of color. She stayed in the doorway, but she did not argue again. Avery snapped on a fresh pair of sterile gloves from the helicopter's emergency kit. Her hand settled into that familiar tightness of latex over skin. The motions came not from memory as a thought, but from memory in the bones. The corpsman pushed a tray of instruments closer. Among them lay a scalpel shining in the dim cabin light, blade clean and narrow. "A little betadine here," Avery said, pointing to the 5th intercostal space along Logan's right side, node of anatomy she could have found in the dark. Cool antiseptic ran down his skin, dripping onto the sheet. She made a careful mental map. Nipple line, rib above to avoid the neurovascular bundle. Target clear. The helicopter rocked slightly as a gust hit it. Rios braced against the frame. Avery waited for one small fraction of stillness, then cut. The blade slid through skin and subcutaneous tissue with a resistance she knew too well. Dark blood welled up, not in the explosive rush of free flow, but in the heavy way that meant it had been building behind a barrier. Logan's face tightened, a noise catching in his throat. "I know," she said quietly. "Stay with me." Her fingers widened the incision. Warmth slicked her gloves. The smell of copper thickened the air. She reached deeper, careful to stay on top of the rib, not below. The corpsman's eyes were fixed on her hands, absorbing every move. There, she muttered mostly to herself as she felt the pleural space give. She guided the chest tube in steady twisting, just enough to thread it along the inner chest wall rather than stabbing at random. For a moment there was nothing. Then a sudden hiss erupted, air blasting past the tube end, followed by a heavy gush of dark blood into the drainage system. The change in pressure seemed to ripple through Logan's body. His shoulders relaxed by a degree. His next breath came in slightly deeper, less ragged. "Watch the sats," Avery said. The corpsman stared at the monitor as the numbers flickered. 90. 91. The heart rate dipped from its frantic sprint down towards something less suicidal. "Blood pressure trending up," Rios called out, watching another screen. His voice carried an incredulous relief. Avery secured the tube with quick sutures, tying knots that held even when sweat stung her eyes. The helicopter still vibrated, the rain still thudded on the fuselage, yet inside the small circle of her attention the world had gone quiet. She repositioned the oxygen mask on Logan's face and sealed it with her palms, watching his chest rise more evenly now. "Welcome back," she said softly. His eyes opened a little clearer. They found her focused. In them she saw pain, exhaustion, and something heavier, something like apology. There would be words later. For now, a faint nod was enough. Avery sat back on her heels, muscles in her arms beginning to register their protest. The corpsman let out a shaky exhale he might have been holding since she made the first cut. Outside, the wind shifted. The noise of the rotor seemed less like an assault and more like a shelter. Rios reached for the frame of the door, then checked himself. He looked at Avery not as the quiet nurse from a civilian ward, but as the medic he had called for when death lined up its shot. He straightened as much as the low ceiling allowed. Then he brought his right hand up to his brow in a crisp salute. "Doc Cross," he said loud enough for Kelly and the cluster of staff at the doorway to hear. The rain patterned his hair and collar. "It is an honor to have you on deck." Avery glanced toward the open doorway. Faces watched her, some pale, some flushed, all changed in their understanding. Kelly's grip on the doorframe had loosened. The young nurse from the code stared in raw amazement, lips parted. Avery did not return the salute. She had left that ritual in another life. Instead, she gave a small nod and reached to check Logan's pulse again. Her fingers settling steady over the artery at his wrist. The beat there answered strong and real against her touch. They moved fast once the cutting was done. The corpsman and a respiratory therapist eased Logan's stretcher out of the helicopter and onto a waiting gurney, handing off lines and bags as they went. The night air bit cold at Avery's damp scrubs. Her gloves smelled of betadine and metal. "ICU is ready," someone yelled over the rain. "Let us move." They wheeled Logan toward the stairwell door. Rios walked beside the gurney, one hand on the rail, lips moving in quiet updates to his radio. Kelly followed, expression taut, trying to reclaim some measure of authority in a scene that had slipped from her control. Avery lingered just outside the helicopter for a second. The rotor spun above slower now, but still stirring her hair. The bright circle of the landing pad gleamed slick under the floodlights, a rough halo of light in the gray drizzle. Her gaze drifted to her hands. Blood streaked the fingers of her gloves in thin lines. It had soaked into the creases where latex met skin. She flexed them once, as if to make sure they were still hers, then stripped the gloves off and dropped them into the biohazard container at the edge of the pad. A phone camera glinted in the crowd near the doorway. Someone had filmed, probably several someones. Screens were already lit up, hands cupped around them to block the rain. Avery turned away and followed the gurney inside. The stairwell felt narrower with the gurney, the team, the security officer, and the weight of what had just happened all pressed together. Voices bounced off the concrete. The helicopter's roar dulled as the door closed behind them, replaced by the echoing clang of footsteps. In ICU, the lights were softer, but no kinder. Monitors waited blank screens and empty lines ready to be filled. A team descended on Logan, transferring him to a bed, connecting him to hospital machines that beeped in cleaner tones. "BP stabilizing," someone called. Sats in the low 90s and climbing. Rios caught Avery by the elbow before she could slip out of the room. "You bought us what we needed," he said. His voice had dropped back to a lower register. "We will take it from here." She nodded once. Her eyes stayed on Logan for a moment longer. Tubes, lines, bandages his face under the harsh light. Alive. Then she stepped backward until her shoulder found the doorframe. She slipped out into the hallway. The soundscape shifted again. Here the beeps and footsteps were familiar. Carts rolled. Phones rang. The chaos upstairs had not yet fully poured down into this part of the building. For a small bubble of time, Avery could pretend it had been just another hard case. She walked to the nearest restroom, pushed open the door, and turned on the tap. Water rushed over her hands, warm, red-tinted for a moment before the pink swirl faded down the drain. The face in the mirror looked like hers, but there was a brightness in the eyes that belonged to another version of her, the one that had worn a different uniform. The fluorescent light above the mirror traced pale lines around her mouth and at the corners of her eyes. She dried her hands and went back to the floor. By early afternoon, St. Gabriel felt different. The usual gossip had been replaced by hushed speculation. People she had never spoken to before glanced at her with quick assessing looks, then away again. Voices lowered when she walked past. At the nurses' station, the television that usually played muted daytime shows now carried a local news channel. The volume was turned just high enough for the words to cut through the background noise. And a dramatic rooftop scene at St. Gabriel Medical Center, where an unidentified nurse performed an emergency surgical procedure on a Navy Special Operations soldier aboard a helicopter. The anchor said, posture crisp behind the desk. Grainy phone video filled the screen. The angle was from the doorway, jostled rain streaking the image. It showed a woman in wet scrubs, hair plastered to her forehead, bent over a man on a helicopter deck. Her hands moved with fast, precise intent. The shot caught the moment she made the incision, the corpsman hovering the officer braced in the doorway. The camera shook as the helicopter vibrated. A hiss of air, a glimpse of dark blood draining into a container. Someone off camera swore softly. The picture cut back to the anchor. Experts are already debating whether this constitutes heroic intervention or a violation of medical protocol. St. Gabriel Medical has not yet released a statement. Turn that off, Kelly said sharply. No one reached for the remote. Avery kept her eyes on the chart in her hands, but the sound crawled into her anyway. Unidentified nurse, heroic intervention, violation of protocol. Her name had not made it to the news, not yet. The Navy officer on the roof had used it loud enough for everyone up there to hear. It would not stay quiet forever. Cross, a voice said. She looked up. A unit coordinator stood in front of her desk, a small crease between her brows. Director Stanton would like to see you in his office, the coordinator said. Now. Avery set the chart down. Of course. Harold Stanton's office sat on the 7th floor where the carpet was thicker and the art on the walls came with plaques. The secretary outside his door looked flustered but tried to smooth her expression as Avery approached. You can go in, she said. He is waiting. The office smelled of coffee and paper. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city in muted tones, the sound beyond a strip of steel water under a low sky. A framed certificate hung behind Stanton's desk, flanked by 2 abstract paintings. Stanton stood hands flat on the polished wood tie, perfectly aligned. His hair was silver, at the temples cut in a style that said he liked control in all things. Nurse Krosky said, Yes, he said. Sit down. She sat. He remained standing. Do you know how many calls I have taken in the last 2 hours? He asked. His voice sounded calm, but the vein at his temple pulsed. No, Avery said. 7 from the media, 4 from legal, 3 from the board, and 1 from a very irate representative of the hospital's insurance carrier. He paced once behind the desk, then stopped. You have put this institution at enormous risk, he said, performing surgery outside of a licensed operating room that is insane under our policies. Doing it in a helicopter in front of phones while wearing our scrubs inside our footprint on our roof. He trailed off, struggling for a word big enough to carry his frustration. I acted to save a patient's life, Avery said quietly. There was no time to reach an OR. You are not privileged for thoracic surgery, Stanton shot back. You are not even credentialed here as an advanced practice provider. You are registered as a staff nurse. Do you understand the liability we are exposed to if something had gone wrong? Her fingers curled around the edge of the chair. Something did go wrong, she said. He was dying. Stanton exhaled through his nose. He moved to the window and looked out, hands clasped behind his back. Heroics do not impress juries, Nurse Cross, he said. They look at charts, at credentials, at whether proper channels were followed. Right now, the only thing separating us from a catastrophic legal case is the fact that he is still alive. He turned back to her. I will have to suspend you pending a full review, he continued. We need to show due diligence. We need to show that we do not condone rogue behavior regardless of outcome. The word hung in the air, suspend. Avery felt a pressure behind her eyes. Not tears that was not the right shape. It was something like a headache forming at the base of her skull. I understand, she said. It was the easiest thing to say, when there was nothing she could argue without dragging more of her past into the room. Stanton reached for the phone on his desk. A knock interrupted the motion. The door opened before he could answer. A man in an olive drab suit stepped in, followed by a woman in a dark blazer carrying a slim leather folder. Both wore badges on lanyards that flashed with the familiar government seal. Director Stanton, the man said. His voice was clipped, his hair close cut. Major Ellison, Department of Defense, this is Ms. Carter from our legal office. Stanton's hand froze above the phone. He blinked. This is a closed meeting, he started. Consider it open now, Ms. Carter said. Her tone was dry as paper. We will not take much of your time. They stepped fully into the room. The major closed the door behind them with a precise click. Avery's spine straightened. The air in the office felt suddenly thinner. Miss Cross, Major Ellison said, nodding to her. Stop. The old title sat heavier than the rank. Stanton looked between them, confusion knitting his features. What is this about? He asked. Ms. Carter opened her folder. Inside lay several documents stamped with heavy red lettering. One page bore Avery's name near the top, outlining an authorization she had never expected to see again. Director Stanton was Carter said. Miss Cross operates under Department of Defense Level 5, medical authority established during her service with Naval Special Warfare. That status, per the orders here, remains in force in emergent situations where life is at immediate risk. Stanton blinked again, slower this time. I am not familiar with that classification, he said. Most civilians are not, Ellison replied. In short, it grants her standing to perform any procedure within her training when delay presents clear danger to life, independent of local institutional protocols. Independent, Stanton repeated. The word tasted sour in his mouth. Within reasonable bounds, Carter added, almost as an afterthought. She slid the document across the desk toward him. The top line was very clear. In emergent circumstances, the holder is authorized to act with full surgical and trauma privileges, regardless of location, when habitual systems of care are inaccessible due to time constraints or environmental conditions. Your rooftop qualifies, Ellison said. So does a helicopter fuselage 10 seconds from losing a SEAL lieutenant to a preventable complication. Stanton stared at the paper. Color drained from his face, leaving the skin along his jaw a sickly white. No one informed us, he protested weakly. There was nothing in her hiring file. There was a sealed notation that your HR department did not have clearance to open, Carter said. Which was intentional. Miss Cross requested that her status not be advertised. Avery looked down at her hands. She remembered signing that form. It had felt like a compromise. She would keep the authorization in case chaos found her again. She would hide it to give herself a chance at anonymity. We are not here to litigate your internal oversight, Ellison said. We are here to make one thing clear. Any attempt to discipline Miss Cross for actions taken under this authority will be viewed as interference in an active military medical matter. The room held its breath. Stanton swallowed. The phone remained untouched on the desk. I see, he said finally. It sounded like defeat. You will, of course, conduct your own review, Carter said. We will provide our report. The Navy will issue a public statement confirming the necessity of the procedure. That should satisfy your board. She closed the folder with a soft snap. On the other side of the office door, footsteps passed, voices rose and fell. The hospital continued to move around Stanton's temporary stillness. He looked at Avery again, but his gaze had changed. There was no longer only anger there. Something like wariness had joined it, tinged with an unwilling respect. You could have told us, he said. I came here to be a nurse, she replied, not a story. Ellison glanced at her, the corner of his mouth almost lifting. He knew what it meant to try to outrun a narrative. Before Stanton could answer, another sound cut into the room, a notification tone from the television mounted in the corner, usually left on silent news feeds. The screen showed a split view. On one side, the same rooftop footage that had played downstairs. On the other, a still image from 3 years ago. A group of men in desert fatigue, sun blasting the color out of the landscape behind them. One of them stood slightly apart, a medical bag at his feet, hand raised to shield his eyes from the glare. The caption read, Red Hollow Ridge survivor identified in Seattle rooftop rescue. Avery's breath caught in her throat. Ellison's jaw tightened. Stanton reached for the remote with a hand that trembled slightly. He turned up the volume. Sources within Naval Special Warfare confirm that the nurse seen here is Petty Officer Avery Cross, the anchor announced. The sole surviving medic from the controversial Red Hollow Ridge operation, which has remained shrouded in partial secrecy for the past 3 years. Old images rolled. Grainy night vision, a ridgeline under starlight. A distant helicopter framed in green. Inside the office, the light from the television threw pale reflections on the glass of the window and the polished desk. They are bringing it all back, Ellison said quietly. Avery sat very still. Her hands lay open in her lap, palms up as if waiting for weight. 3 years of silence, of carefully chosen answers and avoidance tightened into a knot at the base of her sternum. Above it, her heart beat hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. In the ICU, machines kept time for the man she had dragged back once more from the edge of that same story. By the next morning, St. Gabriel no longer felt like only a hospital. News vans lined the curb satellite dishes, pointed at the low sky like white flowers that had bloomed overnight. Reporters clustered under umbrellas near the main entrance cords snaking across wet pavement. Every time the automatic doors hissed open, microphones angled toward whoever stepped through. Inside the lobby hummed. Security tried to direct the flow, but lenses tracked every scrub top and lab coat as if they might belong to the woman from the video. On the ICU floor, it was oddly quieter. Avery stood just outside Logan's glass-fronted room. Machines framed the bed, their lights blinking a slow, careful pattern. The monitor beside him traced a steady rhythm now, each beep measured nothing like the wild spikes from the rooftop. He lay, pale eyes closed, a tube in his nose, a line running to the chest drain at his side. The dressing on his right chest was clean edges of tape neat against his skin. A hand touched Avery's arm. She turned to find the young nurse from the code, her badge, slightly crooked hair escaping from an overworked bun. "They are asking if he is stable enough to talk, Bashikita," the nurse said. "Media Navy, everyone. Dr. Lin says maybe this afternoon." Avery's gaze returned to the bed. She watched Logan's chest rise and fall twice before she answered. "If he says he is ready," she said, "do not push him past that." The nurse nodded. "I will tell them." She hesitated, then added, "And, they are calling a hospital-wide meeting at noon. Director Stanton wants everyone who is on the roof or in the ICU present." Her tone made the word "wants" sound more like "insists." "I will be there," Avery said. The meeting took place in a lecture hall that smelled faintly of old coffee and dry erase markers. Rows of seats filled with nurses, residents, techs, therapists. Even environmental services staff had been called in their green uniforms scattered among the sea of blue and white. At the front, a podium stood under bright recessed lights. Behind it, a large screen showed the hospital logo. Stanton waited just off to the side, smoothing the front of his jacket, talking in low tones to a communications manager. Kelly sat near the front back, straight hands clasped together in her lap so tightly that her knuckles had gone almost white. When Avery stepped into the room, conversations dipped and murmurs slid like ripples through the crowd. Avery took a seat near the aisle. Her badge lay flat against her chest, the plastic still bearing only the title, Registered Nurse. The small silver disc in her pocket pressed against her thigh like a secret stone. Stanton cleared his throat and stepped to the podium. The microphone caught the soft sound and magnified it. "Thank you for coming on short notice," he began. His voice held the formal cadence of someone used to presentations, though today it sat on something less steady. "As you are all aware, yesterday, our institution became the focus of significant public attention." A brief awkward chuckle rolled through a corner of the hall. "You have seen the footage," Stanton continued. "You have heard the speculation." He paused. His eyes flicked almost involuntarily toward Avery. "We have completed an initial review of the rooftop incident in cooperation with the Department of Defense. I want to state clearly here that Nurse Avery Cross acted within the scope of her federal authority and in service of a critical medical need." The words hung there heavier than the technical language suggested. "There will be more questions," he said. "From the public, from regulators. For now, we have asked our colleagues from Naval Special Warfare to address some of them." He stepped aside. Major Ellison took his place, shoulders filling the space behind the podium without any effort. He did not bother with the hospital logo on the screen. He spoke as if the room was smaller than it was, as if he was simply addressing a group he expected to understand. "Most of you did not know who you had in your halls," he said. "That was by design." A few heads turned toward Avery again. 3 years ago, on a ridge in a country that will not be named here, a SEAL team was sent into a situation that turned bad fast. Communications failed, the enemy did not. The extraction that should have taken minutes took far longer. The room felt tighter. Even those who had heard rumor of Red Hollow Ridge seemed to lean in. During that window, Ellison went on, medically trained personnel were expected to triage, treat, and evacuate under direct fire. He did not show the night vision footage. He did not need to. The images had already been on screen all morning on the news. "In the end, only one medic walked off that ridge," he said. She did so after carrying, dragging, and pushing as many of her teammates as she could toward whatever cover she could find. A restless shift moved through the audience. Kelly stared straight ahead, flame-high spots of color on her cheeks. "This is not a eulogy," Ellison added. "Lieutenant Logan Pierce lived until yesterday with complications from that fight. He nearly lost that life because of a secondary trauma. He did not, because the same medic happened to be standing under your neon lights." He looked up, choosing his next words carefully. "I will not address the strategic failures that led to Red Hollow Ridge today, Wow," he said. "The department has its own investigation for that. What I will say is this. Petty Officer Avery Cross carried more than her aid kit off that ridge. She carried silence. She carried responsibility that was not hers." A stitch of air caught in Avery's lungs, her fingers pressed into the arm of the chair. Ellison nodded once in her direction. That ends now, he said. Later, when most of the staff had been dismissed back to their units, a smaller group remained in the hall. The lights had been dimmed slightly, a camera crew set up near the side cords taped down. Beyond the front row, Avery sat alone for a few minutes, the hum of equipment fading into the background. Her thoughts felt oddly distant, as if they belonged to someone else. The door near the stage opened. 2 nurses eased a wheelchair inside its occupant wrapped in a blanket despite the heated room. Logan looked thinner sitting upright, but his eyes were clearer, the lines at their corners deeper when he smiled. Decent view, he said as they rolled him closer to the front. Always did like an audience. Avery stood as he came to a stop near the podium. The click of his IV pole wheels seemed loud even though they barely made a sound. You should be lying down, she said. Could not get good hair lighting in the ICU, he replied. Then quieter. Needed to do this while I still have your morphine on my side. He raised one hand. It shook, but he rested it on hers where it gripped the back of the chair. Stay, he murmured. She stayed. The hospital communications manager gave a few quick instructions to the camera operator and to Logan about speaking clearly toward the microphones. Logan listened with polite impatience. When the small red light on the camera blinked to life, he took a breath. My name is Lieutenant Logan Pierce, he said. His voice carried just enough to reach the back of the hall. Some of you have dragged my stubborn carcass down hallways in the last 24 hours. Thank you for that. A ripple of subdued laughter broke the tension. I served with SEAL Team Bravo, he continued. 3 years ago, our team was on the ground at a place you have heard called Red Hollow Ridge. Things went south. We waited for an extraction that did not come when it should have. He paused, his jaw tightened. You will hear a lot of language about miscommunication and fog of war, he said. There was also a delay caused by someone far from that ridge who made a choice with our lives in their hands and their calendar in front of them. Ellison stood at the side watching. His expression gave away nothing, but his hands were clasped behind him in a hard line. There is a woman sitting out there who lived with that decision as if it was hers, Logan said. He turned his head, searching until he found Avery in the second row. Their eyes met. She ran back into fire for us, he said, again and again long after she should have been on the bird herself. When the Navy asked what happened, she used careful words. She protected the uniform at the cost of her own peace. The room had gone very quiet. Even those who did not fully grasp the politics could feel the edges of what he was saying. If you call her a hero for what she did on your roof yesterday, he added, you should know she was that before you ever gave her a name badge. A warmth pressed behind Avery's eyes, now unwelcome but insistent. She looked down at her hands, fingers interlaced tightly enough to blanch the skin. Logan shifted in his chair and winced. That is all, Sut, he said. I should get back before someone steals my Jell-O. The communications manager signaled to cut the feed. The red light on the camera went dark. As people began to file out, conversations starting up in low, stunned tones, someone moved through the crowd with more urgency. Kelly Monroe came straight down the aisle, ignoring the looks from co-workers who had rarely seen her this off balance. Her ponytail had lost some of its sharpness, strands of hair loosening around her face. Avery, she said. Avery rose automatically. They were almost the same height, though Kelly had always felt taller somehow inside the frame of her own authority. Kelly's eyes were bright, her mascara smudged at the corners. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally found words. I called you a shadow, she said. I told people you would freeze when things got hard. I used you to scare new nurses into moving faster. Avery shifted her weight, unsure where to put her hands. Kelly swallowed. Her voice dropped, making this part only for the two of them. I saw the video, she said. On the roof in that helicopter. I saw your hands. I heard what he said about that ridge. I did not know who you were. Her shoulders lowered as if she had been carrying something heavy that finally slipped. I was wrong, she said. The word came out rough. And I am sorry. Around them the hall continued to empty. The sound of footsteps faded. Somewhere outside a monitor beeped behind a distant wall. Avery studied Kelly's face. There was no flippant edge there, no rehearsed spin. Only a tired, unsteady honesty. We all see things through the work we know, Avery said. You saw a slow nurse with gaps in her charting. You did not see the rest. Kelly let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had not been so shaky. How do you carry it? She asked. The things you have seen, the way people have treated you since. How do you walk around like it is all manageable? Avery thought of the nights she had sat alone in cheap apartments, listening for sounds that the city did not make. She thought of the badge in her pocket, the weight of it against her leg, the memory of rotors in the dark. I do not always carry it well, she said, but I can carry it better when no one is trying to add to it. Kelly nodded slowly. She wiped at one eye with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint streak. If you ever need me to get out of your way, she said, or cover a shift so you can breathe, you just say it. You have earned 1,000 favors that I do not know how to repay. Avery's mouth tipped into the smallest of smiles. It felt strange, the muscles almost unused. I will settle for you not calling anyone dead weight again, she said. Kelly huffed a breath that was almost a laugh. Deal, she said. Later that week, after the press statements and the first wave of attention had crested and rolled slightly back, Avery found herself once more in Stanton's office. The blinds were half drawn this time, muting the view of the water. A stack of printouts sat on his desk, all bearing her name in bold type. The board wants to keep you, he said without the preamble he had used before. The staff survey after the incident was illuminating. Avery stood instead of sitting. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. The Navy has made their expectations clear as well, Stanton added. They intend to continue using our facility in some capacity when circumstances demand. They trust you. That matters. He picked up a pen, turned it in his fingers, put it down again. We would like to offer you a role that reflects that trust, he said. You name the title: charge nurse, critical care lead, director of emergency response. We can shape it. The idea of a title of any title sat oddly in her mind. She thought of the hallways, the codes, the rooftop, the way people defaulted to confusion in the first seconds of a crisis. I do not need a corner office, she said. I need a team. Stanton blinked. You have a unit, he said. You have the staff on this floor. A team that trains for the worst, Avery clarified. A small group drawn from different departments dedicated to the first 10 minutes of any emergency inside this building or on its roof. Clear roles, clear commands, no time wasted on whose territory a patient is in. Stanton sat back considering. That would require funding restructuring union conversations, he began. It would require fewer apologies on television later, Avery replied. He almost smiled despite himself. You have a name for this team, he asked. Cross Response Unit, she said. He winced slightly. That sounds like a joke someone would make about you carrying a cross on your back. It is my name, she said. It is easier to say over the radio than a string of letters. If it makes people move faster, I will take the joke. He nodded slowly. All right, he said. Draft a proposal. Identify who you want. We will start there. Word traveled faster than memos. By the time Avery pinned a simple sign on the staff lounge wall that read, Interest Meeting Cross Response Unit, with a date and time, people had already formed opinions. Some thought it would be a prestige assignment. Some thought it would be a dumping ground for adrenaline seekers. Some had no idea what it meant, only that it had her name on it. On the day of the meeting, a line formed outside a small conference room. Avery arrived 5 minutes early to find 8 people already waiting. By the time she opened the door, there were 12. She recognized some faces. The young nurse from the code standing near the front, eyes bright with a mix of fear and eagerness. A respiratory therapist who had kept a cool head during a rough intubation last month. An ER tech with quick hands and a quicker wit. At the very end of the line, almost pressed against the opposite wall, stood Kelly. Her hands were not on her hips for once. They were wrapped around a notebook held close to her chest. When Avery caught her eye, Kelly lifted her chin a little as if bracing for impact. I did not want to take a spot away from anyone better, she said quietly. But I also do not want to stand on the sidelines while you rebuild the way we answer to that sound. She meant the code alarm. She meant the beat of rotors. She meant all the noises that snapped a hospital from routine into urgency. I used to think I knew what crisis management looked like, Kelly admitted. Turns out I knew what control looked like when things were easy. I want to learn the other part. The hallway smelled of coffee and stale crackers from the vending machine. In the distance, a monitor beeped at a steady, calm interval. Avery looked at her for a long moment. She saw the same woman who had snapped about inventory errors and protocol breaches, and she saw the small shifts. Since then, the softer tone with new staff, the quicker apologies when stress bled into her voice, the way she had stopped using fear as a tool. I am not building a perfect team, Avery said. I am building a team that knows when to admit they are wrong and keep moving anyway. Kelly's grip on the notebook loosened. I can do that, she said. Then come in, Avery replied. We start with why we are doing this, not how. She stepped aside from the doorway. Kelly walked past her, just another body in a small room that would soon hold a different kind of training, a different kind of expectation. As Avery followed, her hand brushed the badge in her pocket again. The metal was warm now, shaped by her body heat. It had seen ridges of rock and the inside of a helicopter and the reflection of hospital lights. Here, with the smell of dry erase markers and cheap chairs, it pressed against her like a reminder. Not of who she had been alone on a ridge, but of what she could build in the narrow fluorescent corridors of St. Gabriel. A year later, the city still wore the same gray sky, but St. Gabriel did not feel quite the same. The elevator doors opened on the main floor, and a voice crackled over the intercom, calm and precise. Cross unit respond to emergency department, priority activation. Heads turned not in confusion this time, but with recognition. 3 people in different corners of the hospital paused mid-task, exchanged quick looks with their teams, and stepped away. In radiology, a tech noted the time, handed off a chart, and moved. In respiratory, a therapist closed a cabinet, told a colleague she would finish the rest of the round later, and headed for the stairs. On the medical floor, Mia Torres put down a stack of fresh linens and tapped her badge against the reader at the stairwell door. In the past year, the cross-response unit had become an accepted part of the hospital's rhythm. They trained together once a week in a small windowless conference room, running scenarios with borrowed mannequins and borrowed time. When the alarm sounded that used the word cross, they knew where to go. The emergency department looked crowded even before the sirens converged outside. Nurses lined up gurneys in the hallway. A paramedic stood at the main doors, radio pressed to his ear, giving a steady stream of updates. School bus rollover on the I-5 connector, so he said. Multiple pediatric patients, mixed injuries. First wave inbound now. The doors slid open to let in the first stretcher. A child, maybe 9, lay strapped to the board, face pale under a smear of dirt, one leg splinted in bright orange. Blood matted his hair. His eyes moved unfocused, scanning the ceiling. Behind him came another and another. Tiny shoes, cartoon characters on socks, the smell of wet asphalt and fear. Avery stood at the hub of the main pod, a paper list in her hand. She had written nothing on it yet. The real work had already been done in her head as the reports came in. Mia, she called. You are triage 1. Start with M for massive hemorrhage. No bleeding, move to airway. Anyone who is not breathing after you open the airway gets tagged as black. You know the system. Mia swallowed once hard. Her eyes were wide, but her shoulders stayed steady. Yes, Chief, she said. The title still felt strange in Avery's ears, but the way Mia said it made it sound like something earned in the hours no one recorded, not just in the minutes that became headlines. Ravi, you take airway with respiratory, Avery continued. Gabe, you are on circulation. I want one person watching the door, counting stretchers, so nobody disappears into a corner without eyes on them. Logan stood near the far wall, a clipboard in one hand, his chest moving easily now when he breathed. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a dark shirt, a laminated consultant badge clipped to his belt. He listened without interrupting, only nodding when Avery's functional gaze flicked his way. The first stretcher reached the triage line. Mia stepped up. Her hands hovered for a half-second, then settled. Name, she asked. The boy stared past her lips, moving without sound. Okay, Mia said softly. You do not have to answer. I am going to check something. She moved through the March algorithm Avery had drilled into them. No major external bleed. Airway patent. Breath sounds present though fast. Pulse rapid. Pupils equal. She tagged him. Yellow squeezed his hand once, then waved him on to the next station. The second stretcher bore a girl with a swollen right thigh. Blood soaked her jeans more than should have seeped from a simple cut. Mia's fingers came away wet when she touched above the knee. Bright red pulse between her gloved fingers. Massive hemorrhage, she said aloud, voice steady. Tourniquet. She slid the strap high and tight around the leg, twisted until the flow locked it in place. The girl cried out once, then clamped her jaw shut, tears running sideways into her hair. Mia leaned in so her face filled the girl's vision. I know it hurts, she said, voice low but clear. We are stopping the bad kind of bleeding. Breathe with me. Her own hands shook a little when she stepped back, but the shake did not reach her voice. Avery watched from a few feet away, not hovering but aware. She saw the tremor, saw the way Mia's shoulders rolled as she exhaled, once grounding herself before turning to the next stretcher. Logan moved among the staff, not as a medic, but as a coordinator, checking that stations were not bottlenecked, that communication stayed crisp. He asked no one to do anything he would not have done himself, but he did not step into their roles unless they faltered. The cross unit moved through the first 10 minutes. Voices layered over one another but never rose so high that panic could slip in easily. Plates rattled, carts bumped, children cried, parents arrived in messy waves, faces drawn tight with dread. When the last ambulance in the first wave had been emptied, Avery stepped back, letting the regular flow of the emergency department take over the slower work of scans, sutures, and reassurance. Her heart still thudded, but it no longer felt like it might burn holes in her chest. She found Mia near the medication station, checking the label on a syringe twice before handing it to a resident. You did well, Avery said. Mia startled slightly, then smiled, the expression shaky at the edges. I thought I was going to throw up when I saw the first one, she admitted. My hands went cold. The room felt like it was spinning. What did you do? Avery asked. Mia lifted her shoulders and dropped them again. I remembered the numbers she ate. Yen said 478. I took one breath like you showed me. It did not make the fear go away. It just made it smaller, small enough that I could stand in front of it instead of under it. Avery nodded. They stood shoulder to shoulder for a moment, watching a surgeon explain something to anxious parents in the corner. His hands moved in the air, drawing a map of broken bones and repairs. You will be afraid again, Avery said quietly. Mia let out a breathy laugh. Comforting, she said. It means you know what it costs, Avery replied. But you also know you can move anyway. They were both silent for a few heartbeats. When you were up there on the roof, Mia said eventually, were you afraid? Avery thought of the weight of the scalpel in her hand, the roar of the rotors, the way Logan's skin had felt under her fingers, too cold and too warm at once. Yes, she fact, and every time, Mia studied her profile. You did not look it, she said. That is because I had things to do, Avery answered. Fear and work do not share space very well. If I'm busy with one, the other has to stand outside for a while. Mia hummed at that, a soft, thoughtful sound. Then someone called her name and she moved away back into the flow. By the time evening shift took over, the bus crash had turned from a disaster into a story that would be told in pieces in break rooms and at family dinners. The children were scattered across floors, some already sitting up in bed, others still sleeping off sedation. Avery finished her last charting and logged out of the computer. She checked with the charge nurse, confirmed that the cross unit had been rotated back to their primary assignments, and then stepped into the stairwell. The climb to the roof was familiar now. Her feet knew where the steps had been patched, where the railing was colder to the touch. The sign at the top still read Rooftop Helipad in red letters, but someone had added a smaller laminated notice beneath it. Authorized personnel only cross response entry point. She pushed the door open. The sky above Seattle had shifted from gray to a gentle wash of violet. The city lights had come up in patches yellow and white and red. The sound lay beyond as a darker band, catching only a faint shimmer where the last of the light touched it. The landing pad gleamed under its own circle of lamps. The painted lines were cleaner now than that first day. New skid marks arced across its surface, ghosts of arrivals and departures that had not needed news cameras to matter. Avery walked to the edge of the circle and looked up. The air was cool and smelled of damp concrete and distant salt. In the quiet, her shoulders dropped. The noises of the hospital softened behind her. For a few minutes, there was only the roof and the sky. A low hum grew at the edge of hearing. She turned her head and saw a small Navy utility helicopter crossing the cityscape, not heading for St. Gabriel, just passing by on some other mission. As it drew closer, the aircraft dipped its nose almost imperceptibly. It was a small gesture, easily missed by anyone not watching. Avery lifted her chin in acknowledgement, a simple nod, rather than any formal sign. The rotors whispered their familiar pattern, a softer echo of the sounds that had once held nothing but danger. The helicopter curved away, its lights winking as it shrank against the horizon. A breeze picked up, fluttering the collar of her scrub jacket. The fabric shifted enough to expose the edge of the silver badge pinned just inside where it usually lay hidden. She reached up and touched it with 2 fingers. The metal was smooth from years of friction and polish. The symbol stamped into it caught the rooftop lights, sending a small bright gleam across her fingertips. For a moment, she felt the weight of every place that badge had been. Ridges under a foreign moon, the inside of a transport truck, the floor of a helicopter over her own city. The pocket of a nurse who had tried very hard not to be anything more than that. She let her hand fall away. The badge settled back against the fabric, hidden from casual view, but not from her. Below, through the open stairwell door, she could hear the faint, regular tone of a cardiac monitor from some room on some floor. A steady beat, patient and even holding time for someone who slept under fluorescent light instead of clouds. Avery took one slow breath, 4 and 7 held 8 out. Then she turned from the edge of the pad and walked back toward the door. Her steps sure on the wet concrete, the sky darkening gently above her as the hospital kept its own careful watch beneath. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.